Hello again, and welcome to the second episode of the Who Cares About Anime podcast. I'm Jonny Lobo, and today with me, I have another great cast of peers in the anime viewing and critiquing world and good friends. First off, hopefully you'll remember him from last time, Paden.
Hello, all, and love and peace!
And my good buddy from years back, and you may also remember him from a podcast centered around Tenchi Muyo called Tenchi Cast. Please welcome Chuck.
Greetings in anime land.
And speaking of old friends and Tenchi Cast alumni, to say the least, I have with me here the founder of TenchiForum.com, Tenchi Cast podcast, and the creator of DidYouKnowAnime.net. Please welcome my good friend Michael.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Let's go on an adventure.
I like the sound of that. We're going to go on an adventure today, and we decided to go with the pull a title out of a magic hat route, meaning we don't really have a formula right now. So today we're going to do another classic, and we're going to do the space western Trigun. For those of you who don't know, well, the internet's at your disposal, and Trigun, it's a similar vein as Cowboy Bebop. May have heard of a little title called called that. Highly original, dashing do-gooder, gunslinger, Vash the Stampede. Yet somehow at the same time, infamous outlaw. And also, to say the least, a big headache for the likes of anyone involved in the insurance business. And here's the part where we have a little spoiler warning. If you're not familiar with Trigun or haven't seen it yet or anything of the sort, I highly recommend you go watch that and tune out from here, because we are definitely going to have spoilers as we discuss our favorite aspects and our opinions about it. So here we go. First question. What was everybody's first exposure to Trigun? When and where, sort of thing? And I think we'll open up the table first here with Chuck.
Okay, well, hi everybody. I'm probably going to be the exception to this group in that I never watched Trigun back in the day when it was on Adult Swim or Toonami. It was just not on my radar then, usually because it was only playing late at night. So that's why I never watched it back in the day. So I mean, I always kind of knew it existed. I mean, how could you not? Everyone was a fan of the striking designs of Vash and Wolfwood, and clips were often used in AMVs and Toonami bumpers and Adult Swim bumpers back in the day. So I mean, I was aware of its existence and I was aware that it was very popular, but I never watched it back in the day. My first real exposure came just over 2 years ago, actually, when I was just starting to get back into anime, and I was coming to my newly found friends, chief of whom is Mike here and John. And I asked, "Hey guys, what's a really cool anime for me to watch? I like space. I like shoot 'em ups. I like sci-fi." And pretty much universally, Trigun was one of the very first ones they recommended me, and it was one of the very first ones I watched. And it was love at first sight. I wish I could go back and take back all those years that I didn't spend watching Trigun, because it became and remains to this day one of my very favorite series of all time in anime. So that was my first exposure. So I'm still, I guess, probably a relatively new Trigun fan, but it's a great wild ride. It's a classic series, and it will never be old.
Much like Charles here, Chuck, if you will, had alluded to, if bright-eyed and bushy-tailed viewers out there are old enough to remember, before the black background and white brackets, Adult Swim's motto was, all kids had to get out of the pool. It's very, very old, very, funny tunes that they would play, pretty much pre-2004 Adult Swim. And towards the end of 2003, they started playing promos for a show that I had never seen before. And that show ended up being Trigun. And, as much as people, have such great fond memories of all of the Toonami bumps and promos, Broken Promise and stuff like that, a lot of the early Adult Swim promos were just as good, and the Trigun one in particular, I think, is one of those standouts because it gets you hooked. It immediately is, memorable. And as soon as I saw it, it was just just like that, I was immediately hooked. And then when it first aired in 2004, I believe, that's when I saw it. And you know, as they say, the rest is history.
Well, I got in on the ground floor of Trigun when it hit Adult Swim over here in the US, and I had no clue what I was getting into. I had not seen any promos for it. I wasn't really an avid late night watcher at the time. I just kind of tuned in that day, and I came in right at the beginning of it, and the art style just kind of caught me, and I decided, I don't like westerns. Maybe I won't do this, but it does look cool, so let's at least give it a shot. And I ended up watching all the way through the first episode. I was pretty taken with the characters, although I felt like that first episode was a little rushed when I saw it the first time. And then I got to watching the second episode and the third episode, and I just really got hooked. This is absolutely one of my top 5 anime of all time. I absolutely love Vash as a character, and I just thrown into this headlong, just on a whim of staying up late watching late night Adult Swim, and yeah, I just kind of never left off of it.
All right, very cool, very cool. We got a mix this time. It was almost unanimous last episode with Yu Yu Hakusho, and I do recall faintly it being on Adult Swim, and of course I do remember, much as Mike said about, okay, kids, get out of the pool, and I didn't have a television in my room or anything, and so growing up, it would get really late and my folks would be like, okay, go to bed, and that was that. And so I kind of had to pick my battles with the Adult Swim, and Yu Yu Hakusho was kind of my go-to show for that, the one I could squeeze in. I had seen a little bit, just little glimpses of Trigun here and there, but it interested me, but unfortunately I could never quite, it eluded me. And so really it was a number of years back, probably only about 3, 4 years back, somewhere in that ballpark, as of this recording. And needless to say, but as everyone has said here, even though they got into it a different way, very much stayed around for similar reasons and remember it fondly for the same reasons. It was fantastic. It hooks you in with like everybody said, it's got that sci-fi feel to it. It's got the old untamed West aspect of it, but also kind of quote unquote the final frontier that has been, of course, famously described by a certain huge sci-fi franchise, and so I love that angle that they did with it, and so my first exposure was Adult Swim. I can almost remember one time or multiple occasions where, if you'll Trigun viewers will know, that the midway point of the each episode, there's that guitar riff that's just it's awesome and it's super loud and it's just and if I was watching the show when I was younger and happened to doze off somehow, well, that woke me up at the halfway point. Oh, oh yeah, yeah, Trigun, yes. Not to say that it's a bore to sit through by any means. So my first proper viewing was just here recently, and talking with these fine people and others about it, much as has what been said. Like any great series or any great work, a huge appeal of Trigun, I think, is the characters, and I think people here will agree with that. So, who's your favorite character or characters? What characters really spoke to you? Really made Trigun stand out, and or why did the particular characters whom you choose? Why did they stand out to you?
All right. Well, this is one of the few cases for me where the protagonist is my favorite character. I am almost always the type of person that enjoys the anti-heroes, the side characters. I know back when Yu-Gi-Oh was a thing, and yes, I was in that craze for a long time. I was the Seto Kaiba fan. Like, I was the one that liked the kind of snarky, like, anti-hero types. But something about Vash has always just spoken to me, and as I've gotten older, I've realized it's kind of because I relate to him a lot. He's so, like, up and down. Like, he's got his ups are just amazing. He's a really great, like, happy person. He's got a lot of energy. He he's fun to be around. He enjoys being around people, but like underneath that, he's got these layers of just hurt and complexity and this like overwhelming sadness that he feels he has to take that burden on for himself and can't share it with anyone. And something about that just really speaks to me. I just really enjoy watching him on screen. It's probably one of, 2 or 3 series I've seen where I actually like the main character best. Other characters, I really enjoy Millie as well. She's just a really entertaining character, and but her and Wolfwood's whole dynamic just to me makes the episodes where Vash isn't like the center point. Like they are an amazing combination and very understated in a lot of ways. I mean, they're very blatant about the fact that there's the attraction and the like chemistry between them, but yet they never really go for it. They just are there for each other and have that weird little banter back and forth. And yet, when Wolfwood dies, it is made so much harder by how attached you get to Millie's character and how much it just wrecks her as a person. And I'm amazed that a series that consists of about 32 episodes, pardon me on that, I meant 26 episodes, can have that kind of an impact on a person and really get you that attached to a character. And otherwise, I mean, the whole cast is great. I mean, the Gung Ho Guns are just a great set of villains. I mean, none of them really stand out to me particularly as a favorite, but the idea of them is great. But overall, just a really great anime. Vash is the king of all Western heroes, in my opinion. I know I'll probably get flack for that from Cowboy Bebop fans, but yeah, that's pretty much my go of it.
I have always been a fan of, and I'm always more connected to shows that are primarily character driven. And in the case of Trigun, it's what characters didn't I like? Damn near every character in Trigun was memorable. I think for one reason or another, even if it was only a little bit, even if there was only one point to make with those characters. We look at the Gung Ho Guns, like, even though not all of the Gung Ho Guns are given a lot of screen time, some only, a few minutes or less, you still remember little bits and pieces of them. And I think that's one of the things that Trigun has done very well is, make their characters stand out. But if I had to pick some favorite characters in particular, I would say Vash, Meryl, and Legato Blue Summers. Much like what Paden said, Vash is a character that we can all kind of associate with. In a lot of ways, he's kind of the everyman. He can only do so much, and oftentimes has the weight of the world on him. But when things get real, he shows those layers that he has. He comes off as the goofball. He comes off as the guy's, oh man, look at the donuts, and is the funny, ah ha ha, I'm going to do this now. But then when the time calls for it, for all intents and purposes, he sobers up really quickly, and we get to see those shades of, the Stampede, the humanoid typhoon, and I think there's a little bit of all of us in Vash, and Meryl, because she, in a lot of ways, she's kind of like she's I don't want to say the opposite of Vash, but she's kind of like the skeptic. She's the realist. She's the one who's like, oh, Millie, what are you doing? You've got your head in the clouds. Or, oh, that can't be Vash. Vash is supposed to be this big, burly man, this gigantic humanoid typhoon who wrecked an entire city and, has caused millions of dollars in, insurance money that we have to go after. But slowly, you see that skepticism taken away every single time Vash does something. And I love seeing that. Like, I love every time Vash will do something and they play that certain tune, and it happens every time they do that with Meryl. And she's like, it's really him. He's really the humanoid typhoon. He's really Vash the Stampede. And so the dynamic that those two have and the way that they're presented is, again, much like Paden talking about Wolfwood and Millie, I always like the dynamic between Meryl and Vash. And Legato, he's he is a fantastic bad guy simply because he he exploits Vash's weakness. His humanity. Like, he says, "Kill me, shoot me." Like, and you think, like, oh well, how does that how is that gripping when we already know what Vash's weakness? Well, we see that come out in Vash. Vash is this, Vash can do anything. He can shoot, the giant Nebraska family hand, spoiler alert, that goes, twirling after all of the kids and the people in that rubble. He's able to derail that, almost any immovable obstacle he can get past. But then Legato is one of the people who, kind of really challenges him in a way that's not physical. And so we get to see that part of Vash come out. And I like his name, like Legato Blue Summers. It rolls off the tongue really well, and I like his design. So if I had to pick 3 favorite characters, those would be mine.
Well, I'm going to echo what everyone else said so far. Every single character in Trigun is just fantastic. It's a rare show that every single character, every single one you see from beginning to end is one that you can really dig into and find enjoyment on multiple layers. And that's what Trigun was for me. It had not one, not two, but 4 exceptionally deep and lovable main characters. And I'm not usually a shipper when it comes to watching shows, but oh my god, I ship the hell out of the main characters of Trigun. Vash and Meryl is one of my favorite anime couples of all time. I just think it's amazing how exactly what Mike was talking about earlier, how their relationship just develops in the most unexpected way, and it works. It works wonderfully well. Narrowing it down a little though, there is one character that was just love at first sight, and I loved every single step of the way along their arc, and that was Wolfwood, the hard drinking, fast shooting preacher man who is not afraid to take a life in the name of the Lord, doing the Lord's work. And I don't know, I love the bad boy minister, the man of God who is not afraid to do what has to be done out on the frontier. Um, it's a trope that you see frequently in many American westerns. Pale Rider, one of my favorite western movies of all time. Very similar thing. Preacher man, gunslinger, and just his inner conflict is really the underscore of the entire show. He is the anti-Vash in many ways. Vash has to confront every day the choice of, do I hurt people? Do I kill people to get away, to survive? And he chooses no every time. Whereas Wolfwood, he's faced with the same stuff out in the middle of nowhere. His same desire to protect the innocent, his same desire to to do good and survive and help others survive, but he makes the choice very differently. He decides, you know what, it's more important to survive than it is to do everything right, and it tears him up inside because he knows it's wrong, and he knows that it's not the right thing to do. And when he meets Vash, you can see it almost immediately. Just this inner conflict kicks into high gear in him, and he doesn't know how to handle it at first. And I love that subtle storytelling and character building that leads ultimately to the very tragic, but at the same time, very, very emotional conclusion to his character arc, where he finally comes to terms with his decisions and realizes that he was wrong, that there was another way all this time. And it was absolutely heartbreaking. But at the same time, it was, in my opinion, the most uplifting and just all around best written part of the entire show was his redemption at the end. So for me, Wolfwood is my favorite character. I will have to say, however, the other character of this show that has always stuck with me is exactly what Mike said. It's Legato. I think Legato is a better villain than Knives. I think he's scarier. I think what he represents is far more uh, intellectually challenging than just the crazy man that is Knives, because he's a nihilist. Unlike Knives, who just wants to destroy everything. Legato doesn't care. Like, he has no care about anything. Nothing means anything to him. Nothing is sacred. No life matters, not even his own. And it's terrifying how effective he is at infecting other people with that mindset. And just his character design is great. And what really gets me every time, though, is the his character music, his background music that plays. It's this creepy, really unsettling, dissonant series of just synth keys played off key, and it grates. It is unlike any other character theme I've ever seen, and it's instantly recognizable and it's instantly terrifying. You know when you hear those off key synth chords that something really bad is about to happen because Legato is about to show up. So he is my other standout favorite character. And I do have to give a shout out to the Nebraska brothers or the Nebraska family. I'm sure our resident Cornhuskers here always get a kick out of seeing them. But I just love their character designs. These big-headed freaks and the tiny big-eyed midgets who just populate this desert wasteland are just some of the best character designs I've ever seen for just a roving band of ruffians. So those are my favorite characters, but it's so hard to narrow it down.
As was said, and especially the more you guys are discussing it, the more I remember that it really is hard to just narrow it down because there's so many interesting characters. And don't think I that the Nebraska family went unnoticed by me or any other viewer from the Cornhusker State, as you said. That was fun, and as well as a lot of other the settlements. They were really going for, they were drawing from, they were using state names, and they were going for the American feel, really. Like we said, the old west, the open frontier. Really cool the way they did stuff like that. And like you guys said, Millie is fun. Meryl is adorable the way, she's having to she's stubborn with herself a lot of times, not only when she's not wanting to see, because there comes a point at first it's like there's no way, but for a while she's kind of stubborn, like, no, this can't be him, this just can't be. And she's a little stubborn, I think, with her feelings that start to arise for Vash. And just the way, like you said, they are kind of an opposites attract, I guess, sort of thing, kind of makes them a cute couple. I would say I agree with Paden in terms of, and I think this is no accident, how layered all the characters, all the main characters especially, are very layered, but particularly Vash himself. So I think there's a reason a lot of people identify with him. I identified with him in terms of, we were just talking about stubbornness. He had his principles of, being a pacifist, even though he's this gun wielding, worth $60 billion double dollars bounty, and he unintentionally often causes destruction where he goes. He himself is just an absolute pacifist, and will not take somebody's life, especially years ago, in that sense with myself. And I think that's, as was mentioned, a great contrast when he meets Wolfwood. Wolfwood's more jaded and really more realistic with he's seen a lot of things out there, and he's still trying to fight the good fight, but he recognizes the world ain't a pretty place, and sometimes you gotta bend or you're gonna break. And so Vash arguably is a little naive in that sense, but I did definitely respect his principles in that, and which made, I'm glad you brought up Mike, Legato. It made that conflict, reaching that point, that climactic moment, just like nail biting, because this was like a dialectical argument here, where he's saying, I will not kill someone, not even you, Legato. And Legato's saying, you're going to do it or somebody's going to die. There's no choice in the matter. And it comes to its culmination there. And absolutely, Legato is I'm sorry. It was cool with the build up to Knives. It was cool how he was so similar to Vash, and you almost think kind of final boss level type thing, like, oh, the only thing that can possibly defeat Vash is another Vash, and that's kind of what Knives is built up to. But Legato was, for me personally, and it sounds like I'm not alone there, he was a much more frightening villain for a lot of different reasons. So yeah, I guess I identify with Vash in not wanting, just trying so hard to not want to hurt people. You want to go through life not hurting people. You want to be able to not bend ever. Now all of a sudden I'm having Madoka flashbacks because eventually if you don't bend, you're going to break. And it's sad. It's sad that the world has to be that way. It's sad that humanity has to be that way, whether we're here on Earth or we're, on the distant world of Gunsmoke, which is an awesome shout out to the TV series that my old man watched back in the day. So I was like, hey, Dad, look, we kind of have something in common. They did this in honor of that. But one of my favorite characters, he is the coolest, in my opinion, is Wolfwood. I can't identify with him as much. It's not who I am, but he is like probably my favorite character because he's just so cool, and for all the reasons that Chuck and others have said, he's just so cool. You can't not love him, and he is a walking contradiction in that he's a man of God and he's advocating peace, but he'll shoot you if it comes down to it. He will. He didn't care, and but in a way, we're all walking contradictions. That's what the world forces us to become. Even if you were as good of a shot as Vash, the humanoid typhoon.
All right, before we leave the topic of favorite characters, I do just have to bring up you brought up John a minute ago the idea of Vash being naive in comparison to Wolfwood, and I would almost argue that you could almost pick up a metaphor for idealism versus cynicism rather than naivete versus experience. I mean, you could pick up that too, but Vash and Wolfwood could very well have been the same person, but Vash chooses to stick to his ideals, and Wolfwood chooses to get a little more jaded and kind of just roll with trying to be a little more, cynical and realistic. And I'd just be interested to hear you guys' thoughts because I've always found that pairing to be really interesting.
I think that's an excellent point, and I think that's the wonderful thing about any multifaceted work like Trigun is it hits all these themes in a deep way, and there's different takeaways and the things that they touch upon. You start getting into stuff. Well, what is the right answer? What is and you have with yourself and with others who have the same experience watching it, different takeaways. Much like Vash and Wolfwood themselves, they're both comrades in arms, and they both can kick ass in their own way, and will let bullets fly when need be. But they have these profound differences. So yeah, that's a good point. Anyone else who wants to jump in here?
Yeah, just briefly, I also think it's a good point. It sort of gets back to what I was saying when I was talking about Wolfwood earlier, um, and what you say about naivete. Of course, throughout the entire show, throughout his entire character arc, you're thinking, oh, Vash, he's the naive one. Wolfwood knows how it is, and the beauty of the character arc of Wolfwood is that at the end, at the very end, he realizes that no, he was the naive one. He was the one who wouldn't even give it a chance. He believed that his worldview was just right, and he was not willing to change it until it was too late. So I think, yeah, there's definitely arguments to be made for either side, but for me personally, that ultimate revelation at the end that he was the one who was so wrong about everything was what really stuck with me in terms of who was really the naive one.
I don't really have anything to add on that subject, but I did want to throw in because I was thinking about it as we were talking about favorite characters. I do want to give a shout out as like a runner up to Brilliant Dynamite's Neon BDN. I always thought he was a pretty sweet character.
Going off of characters, and one could talk on and on about this, and I believe we were discussing, might have been years back by this point, Paden, but just talking about how there's been discussion, there's been seeing people on the internet and stuff, and people who have written thesis papers on the subject of really trying to dissect the character of Vash, and people try. He's so multifaceted, as we all are, almost more so than just a lot of other works of fiction of any kind that you see out there. And so people have a very hard time putting him in a category or pigeonholing him, if you will. I remember at one point, you're more astute on the matter than myself, Peyton, but people trying to put him into, you see those, those D&D alignment charts, and people just kind of like it's just this debate or the big question marks thrown up when it comes to Vash. So what do you think about that?
Well, so what you're saying is you need my D&D nerd expertise to weigh in on this topic.
Put on the thick rimmed nerd glasses, my friend.
All right, here we go. When you're starting off, for those of you that don't know, suppose quick thing of the alignment charts so that this actually makes sense. Uh, Dungeons and Dragons, classic role playing game, had a theory that you could divide any person into a set of morality and ethics. And your ethics were how well you followed the rules or went against the rules, kind of like what your view on rules and codes and doctrine, things like that were. And that's if you were on a grid, that would be your x-axis, so your left to right. Then on the y-axis, you have morality, and that's good, neutral, and evil, which is, if you're looking at it from a D&D perspective, it's kind of more like a good is selfless, neutral is, well, neutral, and evil is selfish, and then the ethics is lawful, you follow the rules, neutral, you could go either way, and chaotic is you go out of your way to break the rules. Um, Give some examples. Lawful good would be like a knight in shining armor. Chaotic evil would be like the Joker. From a just overall, I don't want to say blanket statement, maybe like a first view of Vash. Most people put him as a neutral good in that he does what's right regardless of the rules. It gets a little more complicated than that. For instance, he does show some aspects of that. I mean, he's obviously a good person. Like, regardless, he is selfless to a fault. There's never a point in the series he looks at himself as an evil person all the time for the destruction he can potentially cause and that he has caused in the past. And it's really tragic because he's actually a good person, but he doesn't always see himself that way. From a more in-depth look, he does actually show points in the series where he goes from, lawful good, that like really knight in shining armor, all the way to chaotic good, which is kind of like your Robin Hoodie types, like I'm really out there and I'm really not doing things traditionally or in an orthodox way, but I'm going to get them done. And I'm going to do it for the right reasons. And he shows a little bit of each of that. I mean, he's got his own personal code of ethics that he, sticks to, and he's tries so hard to be, bear the weight of the world on this like way he's chosen to live his life. But in a lot of ways, he does show this chaotic good tendency of he's the free spirit. He's the one that goes from town to town. Just, you know what? I am gonna, enjoy my donuts. I'm gonna be a crazy, go out and have drinks type of person. But then I'm also gonna do the right thing at the end of the day. And I'd say overall, I put him there. But he is an interesting case study of someone whose morals never change, but whose ethics are in such a constant state of flux that it's really not a big surprise that he has such a low opinion of himself because he really doesn't have any consistency with himself, as opposed to someone like his brother Knives, who fits the chaotic evil branch that I referenced before, that just kind of blow up everything, and he definitely does not have as much stability as someone like Legato. Everyone was talking about what an intimidating villain he is. He's kind of the lawful evil, kind of the tyrant, kind of I control you, you don't matter. What I care about and what I'm trying to do is what matters. It's just a very interesting way of having Vash be able to parallel and parallel in a lot of ways Knives as far as not as far as personality, but as far as talents, but then become the polar opposite of both Knives and Legato at once. And it's just an amazing way of looking at a character that is arguably one of the more mentally unstable characters. They can actually manage to keep it together.
Thank you for that, Peyton. I love that. That's a cool way to, and obviously for its purposes and your character building, that's really cool. And I love that people put characters into those categories. But then I love it when there's something that comes along where there's a character that's has so much depth to him or her, and there's so many layers. Um, again, as we all do, they're so human-like that it's like trying to put an actual person into one of those categories. It's like, well, it depends on what day of the week it is, perhaps. So not necessarily having to do with with any of the alignment specifically, but before we move on to Chuck or Mike, do either of you have anything to comment there?
Well, I just wanted to say that I think that kind of just proves right there that not to not to sound too tumblery on the subject, but I think that just kind of shows that the more in depth, essentially the more well written the character, the less you can put them into a very easily thought out binary choice of this is chaotic good, this is neutral good, etc., etc. I think going through and looking at Vash's just his personality and the way that he does things, he doesn't really fit any of those categories. He fits a little bit of him fits into each of those categories, but he's complex enough of a character that you kind of have to. I've never really been a fan of this is how a character should be, and this is how they're supposed to be, and this is what they're going to do because they're like this, etc., etc. Let the character be, who they are, and this is something that I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit later when we kind of go over the dynamic between Vash and Knives, but I think that Vash represents, one piece of pure humanity and one direction that it can go when uh, given certain opportunities and certain things happening in one way that if it could be put into a choice like that, one direction that it would look at, and that it kind of proves that these characters and the way that they act are not black and white, but and I hate saying this now because I said it before the book came out, but 50 shades of gray in between. So I think that Vash is an extremely dynamic character, but looking at the question, is he really a person? In the traditional sense, no, because he's not in the series. But does he have humanity? Absolutely.
Absolutely. Anime is one of those things, as well as sci-fi works and lots of others as well, is that you got to have human characters, even if they're not quote unquote human. And that's certainly the case with Vash.
Before I get started, I'm going to preface that what I have to say about Vash and all the characters of Trigun, in fact, Trigun as a whole, is prefaced on an idea that some may find controversial. So grab your pitchforks, light your torches if you are so inclined. But in my opinion, Trigun cannot be properly enjoyed or fully understood without being viewed through the prism of religion and religious philosophy. And so that really colors my perspective of the characters of Trigun. Some of you may know that the author of the original Trigun manga, Yashihiro Naito, is, or was at least, I think, at the time of the writing, a Roman Catholic, one of the most famous Christian manga authors that there is, widely known. And so a lot of that bleeds over into the story and characters of Trigun, particularly Vash. We see him really as just following in the example that was laid down to him by Rem Savrin, the woman who raised him and taught him the value of life and how to treat other people. So she really takes on, at least in my view, a very Christ-like, very messianic character. She dies for the sins of her fellow crewmates and gives life to Vash and Knives so that they can go on and live, even though she sacrifices herself. And so Vash really is, in my opinion, a disciple-like character. He is trying his best at all times to live up to the model that Rem lived and died for, and he fails from time to time, and he falls short, and it eats him up. And it really is the driving force in his life, is to satisfy this philosophical model that was given to him by someone that he loves and respects dearly, and who gave her life for him. So, in my opinion, yes, Vash is definitely, he represents the best of humanity. He is not perfect. He messes up from time to time, and he loses faith in himself. He loses faith in is his creed, but it doesn't take much to get him to come back, and he's always willing to try again. And so for me, uh, viewed through a very religious lens, Vash is sort of the disciple character. And you can see a lot of that in the other characters as well. Wolfwood is the sort of wayward follower, the lost sheep. He knows what's right, but he rebels against it for as long as he can until he just can't fight it anymore. He knows he has to do right. Um, Knives is just the devil character. He represents all that is evil, willful evil. He just wants to destroy everything that's good. And taken to an extreme, I would say Legato probably represents the atheist character. I'm not, again, like I said, controversial. I'm not trying to say that all atheists are homicidal maniacs, but taken to the extreme, I think that's what that philosophy is shown through in his character, who believes in nothing. Nothing is sacred to him, and so whether live or die, it doesn't matter. And so Vash being sort of the representation of us, the representation of us trying to get along, has to deal with each and every one of those other characters, much as we see in religious philosophy. So that's my piece on it. I'm sure I'll have to duck a few flaming Molotov cocktails afterwards, but that's how I see it.
That's actually really cool, and I hadn't actually realized the part about him being a Roman Catholic. I hadn't studied much on the manga writer, but just to throw in there, you're talking about Knives, Legato as well, kind of the apathetic of the group, the one that none of it really matters in the first place. So why are we bothering? As opposed to Knives is destroy it all. It's all terrible, needs to burn. Just kind of throws in another that sense of doubt.
It is very interesting, Chuck, and gives kind of a whole new casts a whole new light on when you see the flashbacks with Knives and Vash and how they sort of had. It was sort of implied they had this little paradise going, and then Knives messed everything up, and humanity bore the cost. So that's the author and their background. That's something that when you really start delving into something that you want to do, and you can obviously from any work, art has that amazing ability to where anybody can take their own things away from it as well. But it's very pertinent and very it's wise to know about where the author was coming from, and so that's very very interesting. I think we'll just keep going on that train of thought more or less now that we've brought up Knives, and see if there's any further to go here, or at least that we have time for. Is sort of was what was brought up was Knives, and he seems very not as complex as Vash, shall we say. He's about, oh, those humans, they're inferior, they're going to pay, I'm going to kill them all. And that's pretty much his shtick, if you will. So I was wondering, and I was going to open up the floor here in a moment to sort of what was his purpose, and not just as a villain, but obviously his shared background with Vash. And there's sort of a line of thinking in various schools of thought that you only truly know what something is when you know its opposite, when you know what it is not. And I think Knives, in almost every way, is everything that Vash is not. And so I was wondering, do you think that within Knives there's and I guess this would probably be relevant to the author's viewpoint as well. Is anybody redeemable? Do you think that much like yin and yang, there's this duality there? They're opposites, but there's a little bit of there's a little bit of good and evil in everyone, and Knives is perhaps redeemable in some way. Has some other human qualities to him, or do you think it's more like a dichotomy, if you will, which is, I think, on the surface level at least, very much present in the final encounter with the two of them. It's not a true dichotomy because they're very, very similar, and they do have some similarities, but they are so opposed in every way. It's this clash of ideologies. So I guess, how do you see the relationship between Vash and his brother?
I've just recently said quite a bit of what I think about the characters and their relationships to each other, but I think I can expand on it just a little bit, very briefly. Like I said, I personally think that you have to view Trigun through a religious prism to really get the full picture. And like I said a few minutes ago, Knives really stands out to me as just this pure evil character. Unlike other shows where you can sort of feel bad for the villains or understand what their motivations are. Maybe they're not entirely what we would call evil. In Trigun, there really is no sympathy for the devil. Knives is bad to the core, and not only does he relish in the destruction of everything, he seems to be inordinately obsessed with corrupting Vash, bringing Vash in on his plans to just destroy everything that he does not see as equal to himself. And again, I think that really fits very nicely into the role of Satan or the devil in religious theology. And so I see them less as like a brother relationship of two like people. I think they really are very different. They're about as different as you could possibly get, like you said, John. And it's interesting. One of the things that I've struggled most in is the very end of the show. Vash, living true to his code, shows mercy on Knives at the very end when he could have removed his evil from the world. And it fits with Vash, but I wonder at the same time, would Knives have done the same thing? And I mean, we're sort of led to believe no in the lead up, but I'm not so sure. Um, he seems to be very much bent on the notion of bringing Vash in on his evil, and so I wonder if they're really not so different in that respect. They seem to need each other. They feed off of each other. Without the other, each doesn't really have anything to define itself. Like you said, in order to know something, you have to know its opposite. And so it's interesting. I think that's the most complex part of his character, which otherwise, unfortunately, I feel is the most shallow of the characters of Trigun. But at least in that respect, I see a lot of room for thought on Knives' character.
This was something I had kind of touched on slightly, as far as defining Vash as a character. But if we look at Knives, and this is kind of something that Chuck had just talked about, was I think that Knives and Vash, they're not human. In a lot of ways, the ways that the crew looks at them, they're kind of set up to be, in a lot of ways, perfect humans. Like they're set up to be perfect. Like they are the quote unquote definition of humanity. They heal faster than everyone. They're incredibly smart. They can live for hundreds, if not thousands of years. But from an early age, much like anybody else, they have to be nurtured. Knives and Vash are brothers. In a lot of ways, a lot of people like to look at Knives and say, "Oh, he's chaotic evil." But to me, I think that's too cartoonish. I think, when I look at him and you think chaotic evil, I don't see, the mad doctor, twirling his mustache. They were two halves of the same coin. They're yin and yang. They're where one direction would go the opposite. Both of them are treated very badly by one crew member in particular. And Vash would look at it as being sympathetic, like Rem. He's hopeful. Things will get better. While Knives looks at the situation and says, well, if this is going to happen, I'm going to take advantage of the situation. I'm smarter. I can manipulate people. That's not any different than looking at the both of them as one piece of humanity, except taken and amplified by 100 times. We look at one of the first times that we see Knives when Vash encounters him. He's talking like a normal person. I mean, he's still, maniacal, but he's not like, "Bah, ha, 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 twirl my mustache," things blowing up in the background. At least not yet. And so, when I look at Knives, I think that he is kind of the representation of the other half of humanity, the other half of being a person. We see in our day-to-day lives, we see just normal good people. But I think Knives also represents a piece of us that wants to get out more, that part of us that wants to get ahead, that wants to do these things, but he wears it on his sleeve because, it's hyper expanded on because of what he is. And Vash much the same way. So I think when Vash saves Knives, and in much the same vein as Knives wanting Vash to be, in on it, I think Knives really does love his brother. He's just, a little bit crazy. He wants to share that with Vash because he knows that he can do it, and Vash is much like he is. Like, he makes the comment at Vash, like, you don't need those scars. You can do this just like me. And in a lot of ways, he somewhat represents a devilish character in that he tempts Vash, but I don't necessarily think that in particular is what makes him evil. It's what he does with that. It's the actions. Because even Vash does things that he doesn't necessarily like or he thinks represents what Rem taught him and Knives. So if we were to look at it, I think they represent two halves of the same whole. It's yin and yang. It's representing, two ways of looking at humanity and expanding on it, and it is a really, really interesting dynamic.
Paden, do you have anything to add?
Well, first of all, the reference back to Chuck's comments about the biblical references and things like that. Yeah, there's an interesting kind of a fall from the garden parallel going on, but I honestly think Knives has a little more depth as a child is the weird thing. I feel like we can, even though he's childlike and being reactionary by being a child, uh, and I mean he gets treated terribly, but he does go to the extremes. I feel like we get a lot more depth to his character there, and Vash, of course, is always deep throughout his entire existence. But I feel like something of Knives' character gets lost along the way. I feel like it would be a much better yin yang comparison if he wasn't quite so surface level with a lot of his things. I mean, yes, he wears his heart on his sleeve, all that, but I don't know. I feel as if he is probably the least effective of the villains in my opinion. Overall, though, I do feel that the thing was brought up of would he have killed Vash if their positions had been flipped? And I'm gonna be a nerd again here, and I'm gonna end up kind of quoting off of the Dark Knight film with Christian Bale and Heath Ledger. Heath Ledger, rest in peace. In his stint as the Joker, he mentions near the end that you won't kill me out of some misplaced sense of self-righteousness, and I won't kill you because you're too much fun. And I feel like that's kind of the same type of thing that Knives would have as a situation for with Vash. It's he enjoys trying to corrupt Vash too much to just get rid of him. There's no challenge in it. And in prepping for today's podcast, I actually was looking up differences between the manga, which I have not read, and the anime. And the manga actually ends, as opposed to the anime, which ends a little ambiguous as to what's going to happen to Knives. I mean, he's bandaged up and everything like that, and Vash is carrying him, but they're not really clear on what officially happens. Well, in the manga, there's another little story arc that goes on, and ends up they both are getting both he and Vash have a final confrontation, one more final confrontation, and they end up getting stitched up at another person's home afterwards, and they both survive, but Knives disappears afterwards. But one of the things he does before he leaves is he kind of looks at Vash and he looks out the window, and then he makes a plant grow into a tree using some of his powers, and he leaves them with that final little thing. It's his like last gift to Vash, and it's a weird kind of thing for Knives, who's been very surface level. I feel like if that was in the anime, it would help expand him a little bit in that there is room for someone to change. His last act before he disappears forever is an act of kindness to Vash, which is unheard of up to this point. Um, yeah, long story short, yin and yang. I don't feel like there's quite enough depth to Knives' character to give it a fully fledged yin yang title for me of there's a little bit of light inside the dark. But overall, yeah, they've got an interesting back and forth going.
All right. So I guess one of the last things we wanted to touch upon here, and I suspect this might be yet another avenue for some differences here, but that's good. That's awesome. Is of course the 2010 film Trigun Badlands Rumble. So I guess we're going to start with what are your overall thoughts on it, because I've seen the full spectrum of people's reactions to it. I've seen people that just did not like it. I've seen people that were praising it. It was like a comeback for Trigun. So I'm kind of wondering your thoughts on that, and we're going to start with Mike this time.
Well, I guess I'm probably going to have one of the most unique answers on this because I actually have not seen it. But I will concur in saying that I've seen both positive and negative from it, though I think I've seen a little bit more positive from it simply because the fact that, 10 years later, Trigun will get a movie, what's not to like? One of the things that will always kind of ruin that for me, and I won't go into it. I won't go into it as far as because I could fill up an entire podcast on just talking about that in particular. But if you were to ask me how it was brought over here and whether or not I would support it, I would say badly and no. Like I said, I've gone at length in the past with Chuck and John in here about my disdain for Funimation's extreme lackadaisy approach to dub continuity, and in particular the fact that much of it was made public via Twitter and corroborated the reasons behind the lack of returning members Jeff Nimoy, Dorothy Elise Vaughn, and Leah Sargent, who played Wolfwood, Millie, and Meryl. And, just no matter how good it is, whether I watch it today, tomorrow, or never, there's that's always going to be something that I don't think I'll ever really be able to get over, because I think that's a big deal on a whole different spectrum, and it's hard not to be jaded by that.
It's funny. It's funny that you say that, Mike. That you found more positive reaction than negative out there. I've had the opposite experience. I have seen much more negativity with regards to Badlands Rumble than I have seen positive comments. But I will say I may stand alone in this, but I loved Badlands Rumble. I thought it was really good. Not as good as the show, but just a wonderful little fun continuing adventure for the Trigun cast. And it didn't. My only really complaint about Badlands Rumble is that it seems to fit more in line with the first half of the series, the more fun, the less philosophically charged aspect of the show, which is not bad. I mean, it was really fun. It was good to see the characters again having fun, just messing about, that sort of stuff. I would have liked to seen a more intellectually stimulating continuation, something that would have fit more in line with the last half, with a lot of the philosophical and religious questions. But I mean, it is what it is. Both halves of the series were wonderful in their own right. So a small quibble. Like I said, I really enjoyed it. My only other complaint was that it maybe be a bit long in the tooth. I think it's 2 hours or about that length, and a lot of it could have been shortened just a bit. But I thought the new characters they fit right in with the old. Her name is escaping me, unfortunately, at the moment, but the new female character, the lead of the movie, was really well done. I thought she fit fantastically in with Vash. She had a good chemistry, good dynamic going on with the crew, Millie and Meryl, and it was good to see Wolfwood again. I would have liked to see maybe a bit more of him, but I mean he was trolling Vash a little bit, and they eventually did team up, and always a good team to see them together. The villain fit in perfectly well. I mean, you felt for him in the end, you understood him, but at the same time, you understood why he had to be taken down. So, all in all, it was a good Trigun movie. It really was, and seeing the same art style but slightly modernized for a new era, for a new generation of fans, was wonderful. You don't see designs like that anymore in the anime industry, and to see them uh, really lovingly restored, lovingly respected in 2010 was really just a joy for the eyes in that respect. And so, I mean, a note on the dub, I do agree. It was really, especially when you figure out why the reasons, if you can even call them that, that Funimation didn't decide to get anyone besides Johnny Young Bosch back for the dub. It is very disappointing. It really is. I join Mike in really disliking Funimation's habit for breaking dub continuity. But I will say this: the actors that they got to play Wolfwood, Millie, and Meryl did a fantastic job in paying homage and respect to the original voice actors. The first time I went through, I knew that that certain characters had not returned, or certain voices had not returned for their characters. But honestly, had I not known that, I may not have picked up on it. Like I would have picked up on Wolfwood, but in fact, it's funny. Only about a couple weeks ago, in the run up to this cast, did I learn that Millie had a different voice actress in Badlands Rumble. The actress that Funimation got to replace Millie did such a good job that for a year and a half, I thought it was the same voice actress. So, as far as the dub goes, yes, it was a disappointment that they didn't get the original actors back. But for me, it wasn't a big a deal as others have made it. I would have, yes, clearly loved to get the originals back, but I thought the actors that did take on those roles did an A+ job of trying to recreate the original's performance, and so for me, it's a very small demerit in Badland Rumble's detriment. But other than that, I really liked Badlands Rumble. I am glad it happened, and I would love to see more Trigun afterwards.
Well, I'm going to have about the polar opposite opinion of you, Chuck. Just, I think my overall opinion of Badlands Rumble can be summed up with no, just no. I have tried, because I love Trigun. As I said, it's one of my top five anime. I absolutely love all the characters. I love everything about it. I even love a lot of the fan fiction. That's how much I love this show. And I went and watched Badlands Rumble, and I say watched loosely because I've tried 4 or 5 times to sit through it all the way through. I've even watched it in chunks, in sittings. I think it is a real disservice. First of all, on the front, I agree on the dub actors. I think I loved the dub cast. I think the voice actors were amazing. It was a huge disservice to a film to not get the original voice actors back for it. I think that is an extreme sign of disrespect on Funimation's part, and frankly, they should be ashamed of themselves for how many times they do this. Uh, Beyond that problem, though, I felt as if the show, it was, even though it was aiming more towards like the first half of the series where it's a little lighter, I felt like even then they turned it into such fluff that it really couldn't be taken seriously as a Trigun expansion. Like I felt as if it was kind of that filler episode that you do to get ready between the story arcs, or worse yet, I in a lot of ways feel as if it was kind of a money grab. Um, you could tell, even though it had a lot of hours in the actual project, that there wasn't as much like loving devotion spent on this project as on the original series, and it showed. I mean, it's kind of like, not everyone in here is a fan of the American comedy show Drawn Together. I imagine it's kind of controversial, but they had a very, a good thing going for them when they had their series. They finished their series, and then they got a movie years later, and again, none of the original voice actors, things like that, same type of issue, and I put it in the same kind of boat. I think it is really poorly made. I feel like the only character that stays really true to the original character is Vash, and even then they make Vash a little more nonsensical and a little more idiotic than he was before, and a little less of that like happy-go-lucky adventurer head in the clouds type. I just feel that the entire project was one that should have been revoked and then worked on, edited, and sent back out. And I know that opinion probably doesn't make me popular amongst a lot of Trigun fans, but I I feel as if this was a project that would have been better off either not coming out or going through a serious editing process.
All right. Well, I thought this might be one of those because, as I've seen, like I said out there, for some reason this was very polarizing for people, and I think it's because, as Mike having, he and others having fan subbed, I Tenchi Muyo. There's another, comeback kid story there. When you're bringing something that was classic and you're trying to bring it into the modern era, you run into all these hurdles. Such as that. So I'll respectfully, my just opinion of it is I feel very much the opposite of. So I think we almost got like a 2-and-2 thing kind of going here, but kind of the opposite of you, Peyton, and that's okay. Is just it was a lot more like Chuck said. It was kind of the fun aspect of Vash and Trigun. It absolutely did not have that depth, that philosophical or emotional depth that the series did. But to that, in its defense, I would say I don't think it could. I think it's almost unfair to ask it to do that, trying to, be a comeback and trying to have it do what the original way back in the 90s for a one-shot movie straight to DVD, I believe, a movie to accomplish that, I think is asking the moon a little bit, in my opinion. But of course, I will agree with our end here in the English speaking world. Funimation really dropped the ball there. You can even go ahead and use whatever search engine you would like, viewers. And if you search up, Jeff Nimoy on the subject matter, use the voice of the original Wolfwood in the dub that most of us are probably familiar with, and he basically said like, yeah, they did it behind my back, and especially here, we're not even dealing with a series reboot. We're dealing with a one-off movie, and so again, that Wolfwood and his replacement actor, as well as everyone else's, I don't think I knew about Millie either. Everyone else's were, no discredit to the actors who portrayed them. I think they all did a very good job, and they're doing their job. But it's whoever was in charge of that, pulling the strings, hopefully not Legato, whoever's in charge of that really dropped the ball there. It's one of my three strikes with Funimation, along with Portrayer Burchard and the newer Tenchi Muyo materials, and the brief shout out to Bakano's Isaac and Miria in Durarara. Those were the two other instances of Funimation where it's like, come on. But I feel on the Japanese end and the story wise and everything else, I enjoyed it, and I thought it was a very valiant attempt to bring Trigun into the modern day, and it's hard to get a full series reboot after so much time, and for all these other factors and reasons. I Tenchi Muyo, for example, was a mini series essentially, trying to get that interest back. I feel probably doing a one-off movie was probably a safer bet, financially speaking. And as Chuck said as well, they really retained the art style of the original to a degree it's not exactly like the original, but to have something that was originally in the 90s and then in 2010 look the way it did, you just don't see that, like ever. You just don't see that. So I applauded them for that, and overall I enjoyed it. And I think it will continue to be one of those things where I think people either love it or hate it.
I want to jump in here real quick and kind of explain a little bit, because I wasn't I wasn't sure how much we were going to go into that subject in particular, but I do think it warrants being said, just because of the gravity of it. As it became a motif of everyone's answer, I do think it's worth explaining a little bit. I just want to say first that I do not hold it against any voice actor that has to replace a well beloved voice actor. Like I'm sure that the replacements for Millie, Merrill, and Wolfwood did a fantastic job. I do not hold that against them, and I understand their situation absolutely. That's not why I have the disdain, and the I guess the cynicism for Badlands Rumble that I do. But for the longest time, and I'll try to make it as brief as possible. There's a professionalism that exists between the voice actor and the company, and they never show that to the public. The inner workings are never told to the public, especially in the world of anime. Like that just doesn't happen. I personally, having understood and studied the industry for a long time, had kind of formulated my own opinions on it and kind of had a general idea. But when this happened, when Trigun Bandits Rebel came out and they first made the announcement and they released the dubcast that only Johnny Youngbosch would be returning, very quickly it was made clear that there was something wrong. Well, for pretty much the first time ever, I mean, I don't know if I want to use the term whistleblower, but I mean, that's kind of sort of what it was. Jeff Nimoy very unapologetically went on Twitter and pretty much told the world that, kind of let the world know how Funimation deals with that. And he was asked, but he asked to be paid as much as he had before with Pioneer or somewhere near. And they told him that they would work on it and they would let him know. And then proceeded to not let him know and dub the show without letting him know. And that is completely unprofessional. Dorothy Elise Fawn said much the same thing on Twitter. And so now we have a reference point for, every single time a voice actor from a beloved series does not come back, it's because Funimation does not want to pay them for whatever reason. And we're not talking about, good pay. We're talking about next to nothing. And I mean, like I said, I don't want to go into that too much, but Badlands Rumble in a lot of ways was kind of the eye opener as far as that's concerned. So it really also adds to the density of disappointment as far as you not only are you not hearing the characters in the way that you might want to, and in some cases it's fine. Some people don't notice it, some people are okay, and that's fine. I'm not, that's absolutely nothing to hold against anybody. But for those of us, and I think this is something that they really underestimated, was and also showed that they didn't really understand the show they were getting into when they dubbed it, was the fact that Wolfwood is just as popular, if not more popular, than Vash. Wolfwood is exceptionally. You see more Wolfwood cosplays at conventions than you do Vash, straight up. Part of that is because it's easier, but also partly because he's extremely popular. He's one of, if not the most popular character in the series. And the fact that Jeff Nimoy himself was also ready to go, it's extremely disappointing to know that not only did they not come back, but that it was literally the company's fault, not theirs, that they didn't come back.
Well, and especially considering when you've got actors that love a part, you know what? If money is an issue, if an actor truly loves a part, like an actor that is, doing well enough to live already, they will take a smaller pay if it's something that they really, really care about. And I think that's something that a lot of dub companies, and unfortunately, though I love Funimation's dub quality, they do this mistake a lot. They assume that, okay, they're a popular a voice actor, even if they love our project, they're going to want like double the next guy. And honestly, if you just tell them what you're willing to pay them, with a lot of these people, they love their work. They would gladly come back, and I agree. It's completely on them that they did not have the same voice actors. Not dissing the voice actors they picked, but they could have had the originals.
It probably ties in a lot with, how Badlands Rumble was received here and why we see these mixed reviews is because, especially when you're dealing something with, uh, we throw it in the realms of classic or it's from back in the day. People over here, most people were very accustomed to the dub, and so a lot of contemporary anime viewers now, they're very much subtitles. That's cool. That's fine. Um, but yeah, I think unfortunately a lot of times, Funimation, they're sticking with the contemporary. They're a company in the here and now, and they're very hip with those things, or try to be anyway. And I think unfortunately when they do that and they pick up a legacy admissions, if you will, they just didn't know how to handle it clearly. And hopefully with something like this and with Tenchi Muyo and other examples as well, hopefully they'll kind of figure it out here for their own good. But thank you all for sharing on that. Is there any other? Of course, Chuck, if you had anything to say, or anyone else have any closing statements?
Yeah, I mean, I've said my piece on the Badlands Rumble dub and dub replacement, so I won't go into that again. But I will say for the 5 of you out there left in the world who have not watched Trigun, if you're wondering whether to watch it dub or subbed, I have to say dub, because it is one of the all-time great dubs ever made. Every single voice actor nails their character and is perfectly fitting and perfectly portrays all of the emotion and all of the pathos of their characters. So I'm generally sympathetic to dubs, but this is one where I will straight up say the the dub is every bit as good, if not better, than the sub. So, and that's a reason, and that's part of the reason, the unspoken reason why it was so controversial when Funimation changed them, is because this was one of the great dubs. This was one of the first dubs that everyone could pretty much agree on was just as good, if not better, than the Japanese dub. So, unless you're a hardcore sub-only elitist, in which case I'm sorry for you, definitely give it a try in the dub first, because you will find something special in that dub.
All I'm saying is, I want to see an Outlaw Star Trigun Bebop crossover. The end.
Yes, yes, all of my yes.
Make it happen.
You want to talk about breaking the internet? That'll do it. Just take my money.
I mean, Funimation owns them all right now, so make it happen, guys.
Unfortunately, it probably won't, but if they ever do, oh my gosh. And I have one final thing for me that's just a question for you guys, and it's due to the fact, we've covered a lot on the characters and everything, but let's not forget, this is a true, even if it's a space western, it is a true western. And therefore, I don't feel this podcast would be complete without asking, if we had an old-fashioned shootout, we're going to assume the semi-phenomenal powers of like Arm of God type stuff is out, but just straight up shootouts between Vash and Wolfwood, and then a showdown between Legato and Knives. Who would win in each pairing, and why?
Oh boy, man, the fashion Wolfwood one. That's cruel, man. That's cruel.
It was meant to be.
Yeah, well, I'm just gonna end that with I mean, Wolfwood. He's probably one of the best gunslingers out there. But Vash, he's literally not human. He can shoot faster. He can move. So I don't want to go there, man. But I don't see how anyone could beat Vash in a shootout. I mean, just anyone.
Wolfwood has a Gatling gun shaped like a cross that carries pistols in it. I mean, enough said. It's full of mercy, right? Yeah, mercy and 50 cal bullets.
Also, we want to talk about, fantastic characters and fantastic setting and a fantastic dub cast. I don't think it's a far stretch to say that Trigun has one of the most memorable soundtracks in all of anime.
Certainly one of the most memorable openings, absolutely.
Oh, everything about that soundtrack is just absolutely flawless. I have it, and my 2 top soundtracks. One is from an anime, and that would be Trigun, and the other one is from 90s PlayStation 1 game, and I think, Mike, you're familiar with this one, Legend of Dragoon, and those would be my 2 big like anime-esque soundtracks.
I was gonna say, you cannot go wrong with those choices.
Well, I think we've strayed outside of our bounds. So
Yeah,
I think,
we're getting into the loopy zone here.
Indeed. Maybe you want to put us out of our misery there, John.
I got a cross full of mercy for y'all. Man, well, hey, discussion can always continue. That's what the internet's for. That's what forums and YouTube comments and the like are for. But I think this is a great place to call it a day. And I just want to thank you all, gentlemen, for your time. This was a wonderful discussion. I want to thank everyone out there who takes the time to listen. If you are so inclined, you can subscribe to us here on YouTube. We're going to keep doing this with different titles every episode. And now we're on iTunes, so you can go find us there as well. We'll put links in the description to help you out there. So I guess on a final note, thank you all again. Love and peace, everybody, and we'll see you next time.